Welcome. Thank you for joining us for the June episode of Chang Reaction. I'm Mary Pruden, the Director of National Keratoconus Foundation. We're a patient advocacy program based in Southern California at the University of California at Irvine. NKCF provides information to patients, their families, and tries to raise public awareness about keratoconus. We invite you to visit our website, nkcf.org, sign up for our newsletter, and register for our bi-monthly webinars. Also, check our social media for updates and news about keratoconus. This is Chang Reaction, our Ask the Expert podcast. Our partner for this is Dr. Chang, a noted keratoconus expert and a friend of NKCF. We often receive questions about life with keratoconus, and Dr. Chang has offered to answer them and share his advice. NKCF tapes these podcasts and archives them for the public. Dr. Chang is currently the Director of Specialty Contact Lenses on the Cornea Service at Wills Eye Hospital in Philadelphia. He's also a member of the medical affairs team at Glaukos, the company that makes the FDA-approved crosslinking equipment and product. He's a graduate of the Pennsylvania College of Optometry and a fellow of the American Academy of Optometry. Dr. Chang completed a Cornea and Contact Lens fellowship at the Cornea and Laser Eye Institute in New Jersey, where he focused on the treatment of keratoconus patients, including his participation in the clinical trials for crosslinking. Dr. Chang is a prolific writer, speaker, researcher, teacher. I am also proud to say that Dr. Chang was named top doc by NKCF in 2020. Hello, Dr. Chang.
Hello, Mary. I'm going to say the last one is my biggest accomplishment up to date, being the top doc from NKCF, recognition from NKCF. So thank you for having me.
We're so glad you're here. Let's get started. So this month we have a potpourri of questions for you, and we received one recently.
I'm ready.
Okay, let's see. There we go. We received one from Luke. He's a 16-year-old with keratoconus living in Florida. He recently had crosslinking and he knows he's not supposed to rub his eyes. But Luke has been a wrestler and he was wondering if it's time to retire. Is this sport putting too much pressure on his eyes? Luke asks, can you wrestle with keratoconus?
Well, Luke, that's such a great question because it's not, a lot of my patients are athletes, and these are the questions that do come up because it is related to your career as an athlete. And so generally speaking, it is definitely highly recommended for keratoconus patients to avoid eye rubbing. So you obviously did a great job, you and your doctor, by listening to each other. So we want patients to avoid eye rubbing, keratoconus patients, or to avoid exerting excessive pressure to the eye or the eyeballs, as these activities of eye rubbing and extra mechanical pressure exerted onto the corneal surface may increase the risks of keratoconus progression. For other audience, I know that Luca already knows that part, hence the question. So it often is, in my mind, it's often a very tough ask for my patients, especially those who participate in sports, to avoid trauma to the eye or pressure to the eye, because these sports activities are difficult to be mindful of that when you are paying attention to the things that you're supposed to do and your technique during your participation in your matches. So even more difficult when it's a contacting sport like wrestling. So protective eyewear that are shatter resistant, the lenses themselves, and hopefully also the frame, can be very beneficial in increasing the level of eye protection during practices and also real life matches. And fortunately, a little bit of Google search had led me to reading the story of John Trench, and we'll leave the links of John Trench, and also who's a NCAA wrestler, and also another link that I found with similar stories about keratoconus patients aspire to be a wrestler, and what kind of eye protection are needed. So we'll drop that link, those two links, in the description of this video for audience to further look up resources for themselves if you're interested. But the precedents that I'm referring to is that an NCAA level wrestler such as John Trench, who was able to get permission from NCAA to actually wear customized wrestling goggles during his matches. And his experience, as you'll find by clicking on the links that we'll include, is that after his retinal detachment repair surgery, he was advised to, same thing as keratoconus patients, to avoid eye trauma. You know, he and his team and his coach thought that maybe he will not be able to participate in wrestling anymore, similar to what Luke's concern is, unless there's some sort of proper protective wear, and whether or not he can get permission from NCAA to actually wear those protective eyewear during his matches. So, you know, it wasn't easy for him to find the proper and appropriate eyewear for him to get enough protection during his matches. Also wasn't easy because the regular sports goggles that he had first started trying would usually break during his matches, and then can cause bruise around the eyes for him, even if it's not directly on the eyeball itself or the cornea itself. But also can sometimes cause a similar bruising injury to his opponent. So therefore, it took him a while to actually be able to figure out and work with different sports, you know, engineers to find out what level of protection does he need in the body and the frame and the lens of the goggles. So it's very important to seek the advice of your own eye doctors regarding the exact protective eyewear that you may need, and also consult with them and give them the specifics of your activities and any type of additional eye conditions that you may have that could act as extra stimuli to cause mechanical pressure to the eye. What do I mean by that? For example, allergy that affects your eyes, or even dryness that affects your eyes, may cause athletes or any keratoconus patients to want to rub their eyes due to itchiness. So controlling those conditions can provide further protection, whether during the actual matches or outside of those situations. So your own eye doctor then could recommend the proper gear for you, and then also potentially recommend close monitoring of your keratoconus condition. Because if keratoconus progression is detected, then your eye doctor may recommend the FDA-approved corneal crosslinking to halt or slow down the keratoconus disease progression. So it is definitely also important to be mindful of that treatment approach, but also important to discuss the risk and the benefits associated with such treatments with your doctor. And also and again, the links will post them underneath so that you could read up more on the specifics. And I believe in the resource, there's actually tells you where one of the athletes in high school where they actually obtained the protective eyewear. But after reading that, if there's any other question, Luke would love to help you further. So certainly send in the questions to us, and we'd love to look forward to seeing your success story being covered on newspapers and circulations someday in the future. So Mary, do we have another question to answer?
We do. That's great. Thanks for that answer. There's a question that we're often asked, and maybe you can help clarify things. Patients are told that their vision and their eyes are changing while their keratoconus is progressing. And then the doctors usually say something like, at a certain point, it'll stabilize. So the question that we get is, at what stage does keratoconus stabilize?
Yes, and that's such an important question that affects all our keratoconus patients, and obviously also their family members, because they rely on each other. So patients are typically more vulnerable to keratoconus progressions during certain stage in the natural course of the disease. So it's definitely prudent to take extra precautions during those time period. So if we do look at my clinical experience, that of others, and also medical literature on the typical natural course of the keratoconus condition, and by natural course I mean without taking account into any type of medical or surgical intervention that can be provided, such as you can refer back to the previous question when I mentioned the FDA approved corneal crosslinking. But coming back to what taking a closer look at that natural course of the condition, most patients excuse me, will present early in life, usually around or maybe even a little earlier than puberty, and then continue to progress up to about fourth decade of life. And that is to say maybe like mid-30s or possibly even early 40s. And again, it doesn't mean that you won't progress after that age or even start younger than puberty. The earliest case I remember reading in literature is somewhere between age 4 to age 6. Certainly, possibly even younger than that. But regardless, you can onset certainly earlier. You could also possibly continue to progress after that late 30, early 40. But most of the time, progressing at the late stage at a much slower pace. And that can be important because, number one, most people, mistakenly think that, I have nothing to worry about once I get to late 30s and 40s, and they become more likely to, rub their eyes. They're not as careful after that stage because they think that they're absolutely stabilized. Again, that's not necessarily true. The risk of progression is really there it can be there for much longer than your puberty up to about age of 40. However, it's just at a much slower pace. So that means that it is still important to have it's still important after a late 30s and early 40s to continue your corneal monitoring with your eye doctors. But potentially at a longer interval, you don't have to go as often, but talk to your eye doctor about that and know that it is possible that you can continue to progress, but usually at a much slower rate. And so patients are considered to be relatively stable. On the flip side of the coin, you could, your family members, your son, daughters could obviously, have the condition earlier than their sort of, early teens, as I've referred to. So people with your family members of keratoconus patients, those people who we consider having higher risk level of potential progression, because obviously it's not guaranteed that just because your parents have keratoconus that the son and daughters would have keratoconus, but you're at a higher level risk in those cases. So make sure that patients with higher risk, such as very strong family history, that they do get their eye exams more regularly and be monitored for keratoconus, and share that information, meaning family history, with your eye doctors, and make sure that they start watching for potential progression or onset of keratoconus at a younger age. So I hope that answers the question. Mary, do we have another question for today?
We do. So there's no magic date, I guess, where things stabilize. That's I guess that's important to know. We got one more tonight, and this is something that we do hear a lot of. Judy wrote us and said that my father is suffering from keratoconus. He's currently using contact lenses. She doesn't say what kind, but she says they're very uncomfortable for him. She wants to know, is her father a candidate for corneal transplant? What would you say to a family like this?
Mary, that's such a good question. And thank you, Judy, for sending in that question. So I get this question, and I'm sure you do too. And, I get this question all the time from patients and their family members about, the case of is corneal transplant basically the only option if the family member in question is having trouble with contact lenses. And so you know that given the fact that I have to answer these questions all the time, that I must have an answer ready to go. And so at a superficial level, I would say the short answer is a resounding maybe. And I know you're disappointed by such a non-committal answer from an expert like me who you expect more. And I get it. I'm not being coy. Let me explain further what I meant, because there's some nuances here that I think people don't often think about. Just like our question about natural course of keratoconus, when is it most likely to progress? And people mistakenly interpret that as you don't progress outside of that range. So here, there are also nuances like that. So let's break this down. So Judy, if your father cannot tolerate contact lenses despite having exhausted many different specialty lens designs, or cannot see well enough despite having a comfortable, well-fitting lens, and you exhausted many different type of lens options to improve vision, and then there's no, assuming there's no increased ocular risk for surgical complications of post-corneal transplant recovery complications. What I mean by that is sometimes, patients with active infections in the eyes or even systemic conditions like being diabetic can increase your complication rate because your recovery is typically slower. So assuming, talking to your eye doctors that there's no associated increased risk for complications. So those three things, then technically your father would be a good candidate for corneal transplant. But let's break down a little further on the two major criteria that I just said, right? Number one, I talked about the fact that the contact lens intolerance, meaning the patient has really tried so many different kind of lenses and always with the same outcome. Vision is good to satisfactory, but there's a lot of discomfort involved. So number one, contact lens intolerance. I want you to remember that. Number two, visual function with contact lens, meaning how well does this patient see, your father in this case, Judy, how well does your father see with the specific contact lens prescribed to him? So many people have not heard of the word contact lens intolerance. They don't know what that means. So what actually is contact lens intolerance? Because to a lot of patients, the first lens they wear that they are not comfortable with and they give up on wearing contact lenses, they seem to then think that they are not the right candidate for contact lens, and they self-pronounce themselves as being contact lens intolerant. But that's not really true, especially in light of the fact that there's so many new contact lens technologies that we really have come a long way in the last 5+ years. And patients who were struggling with previous generation of lens designs actually have done really well in one of the newer type of specialty contact lens technologies. At least that's my personal experience with my patients. So I see patients in my clinic who would, present with such history and saying, they're giving up on contact lenses because the lens that they have worn or have been given doesn't work for them. However, when we dig into their records, it is apparent to me that basically for the last X number of years, 5 to 10 to 20 years, that they've been struggling with contact lenses, they've been basically fit or refit into the exact same type of lenses, maybe corneal GPs or corneal gas permeable lenses. Maybe it is scleral lenses, maybe it's soft lenses, but it's basically the same type of lens, maybe with a little bit of modification to the shape or the size, because you can customize these specialty lenses. So even though they're technically the same type of lenses, but in a slightly different size or different shape or different prescription, patients think that in their mind, they've tried so many different lens types and they have failed everything under the sun, and it really isn't true. So you have to work with your eye doctors and be ready to provide records from the past or recollection of what has been done in the past in order to figure out if one of the newer technologies in the specialty contact lens area can help you or your father. So I certainly wouldn't give up so fast yet. And number two, remember the second criteria that I talked about was maybe even the lens is well fit, but the vision is not good. Then that would also qualify a patient as being a good candidate for corneal transplant. And in today's age, with the new technologies that I've spoken about, with specialty contact lenses, really the only, at least one of the most common reason for somebody to wear specialty contact lenses but do not get good level vision, one of the most common reason is scarring on the cornea, which can occur in keratoconus patients either naturally, just with progression of the disease, which is why it's important to work with your eye doctors and see if there's a need to stabilize your condition. Again, refer to the very first question that I gave answered about the FDA-approved cross-linking. But that typically is the most common reason, and it could come from just natural progression of the disease. Or second reason, possibly the way the contact lens is being fit, plus the trauma of rubbing of your eyes, together that's too much pressure for the surface of the eye and possibly increase the risk of developing a corneal scar. And if the corneal scar is in a centralized location that the patient is looking through, we call that visual axis, right? That's the point that you're looking through. Now, it doesn't matter how good a contact lens is, no light is going to penetrate through a very dense scar. So it is also important to figure out if that is the reason. So if vision is if dissatisfactory visual performance with contact lens is the reason that your father can be a good candidate for a corneal transplant, then try to figure out if that is the reason. If it's because he's wearing an old style contact lens and therefore he has some sort of residual refractive conditions that cannot be further corrected in the contact lens, some of the newer specialty lenses, again, can actually bypass that and give your father a better, visual capacity and function to be able to do everything, hopefully, that he wants to in life. So to summarize, if your father truly fits into one of those, either or both of those two criteria that I mentioned, then yes, he could be a good candidate for a corneal transplant. But he does need to understand that, and I do tell my patients this a lot, because most people think getting a corneal transplant equals no contact lenses anymore for them. And that's actually not true. So getting corneal transplant is not a way out of having to wear specialty lenses for keratoconus patients, because the way that corneal transplant heals, it may still be an irregular shape, right? It may just hopefully better than the shape that his keratoconus used to be. But that doesn't mean that he won't need specialty contact lenses to improve his vision. So don't use it as a way to get out of wearing contact lenses. And number two, also important to understand that there's a lifespan expectancy associated with corneal transplant tissues. With new technique of tissue preservation in the eye banks, these lifespan issues are probably, we're being able to get more time out of each corneal transplant. However, patients need to understand that even if there's no rejection and they accept the transplant really well, that there's always the chance that you need more than one corneal transplant surgery throughout his or her lifetime. So again, it's not a shortcut. So make sure that you fully discuss those options between your father, yourself, and his eye doctors. So that's hopefully not a too long-winded way of answering that question, Mary. Do we have another questions?
We'll wrap up for today, but I think your answer was particularly useful, because we do hear from a lot of people that believe if the contact lens hurts, that I'll get a corneal transplant and it'll all be fine. And these people are often surprised to hear that, well, they'll still be in contacts. And your advice to, go back to the doctor and, try several different kinds of custom contact lenses before you, give up on them is also going to be something that a lot of keratoconus patients really have to hear. If you haven't had a talk with your doctor about what's new, you should have one the next time you go in, because it seems like there's lots of innovations in the field. So thanks for taking the time to answer some of the questions we get. We get some interesting ones, and we'll, anybody who has a question that they would like to hear Dr. Chang's advice on, or just get some more information, go to our website, nkcf.org, and there's a tab that says For Patients. Under that tab, you'll find the Ask the Expert /Chang reaction, and you can type your question in there. We'll get it, and we'll see if Dr. Chang can answer it at an upcoming episode. In closing, I want to thank him for taking time out of his busy schedule to work with us. And let me get to the next slide. There we go. And thanks to everybody for listening. And remember that NKCF operates with the support of our friends and our donors. If you feel the urge to support us and programs like Chang Reaction, you can make a much appreciated online gift to the UCI Foundation. Find out more information, and you can make your gift on our website. I also want to thank the company Glaukos, who has provided us with a generous educational grant that we use when we print and mail material out to people. And their support has helped Chang Reaction become a reality. Join us next month when Dr. Chang will answer more questions about all things keratoconus. Bye-bye, Dr. Chang. You want to say goodnight?
Yes, thank you for having me. As always, I have so much respect for what everybody does at NKCF. And for those viewers out there, please continue to send in your questions. Answering your questions, honestly, is one of the favorite things I like to do. So please continue to send in those questions. I look forward to being able to provide some clarity if you haven't had enough information up to this point. And until then, stay safe, be happy, and remember not to rub your eyes. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Bye-bye.